Me and Ghazi TV just had our Tavern Talk podcast where we brought on the developer from last Epoch named Mike. Now, Mike was a fantastic person to interview. He was bluntly honest with a lot of his questions. So I'm going to break down some of the more juiciest bits. And if you're looking for the full, unedited, raw podcast, I will have a link down below the Ghazi TV's channel where you can find that in its entirety. So let's give you some of the highlight recaps of the information that we got from this podcast. Well, we started with sort of a fun one. We said, is your team nervous? The launch is coming up. Are you guys excited? We know it's a somewhat small team. So how are you guys feeling with the launch of the game so near?
Very high energy. It's a lot for everyone. For some of us, it's our first game, like big game launch like this, where there's a lot of eyes on it. You never really know how it's going to go. And confidence is high. You know, it's a lot of energy, and I'm really excited. I'm really looking forward to it.
The next easy topic was trade and item factions. They just released information this week about how trade is going to work, solo self-found, all of these types of conversations. So we asked them to have a little bit more clarity and dig into that topic a little bit. Here's what they had to say.
There's actually 3 things going on in total with the factions, or specifically with the trade faction. So Merchants Guild, the primary currency they're going to use to trade with is gold. You post something up and you say, this is how much gold I want for this item. When you go to buy something, you say, this is how much gold I'm spending to buy this thing. The second thing was reputation. And reputation is actually the reward for trading. So reputation is what you get out of completing a trade. And that's how you progress into higher ranks of your faction. The other resource is favor. Favor is something that you earn by playing the game while you're representing one of the factions. And so while you're representing Merchants Guild and you just go out, you complete quests, you kill monsters, you do echoes, you do dungeons, anything you're doing earns you favor. And there will be a favor cost associated with interacting with your faction in any way. So if you're buying something, if you're selling something, that costs favor to take those actions. We're taking a little bit of a look at some of the feedback we're getting, because we are getting a lot of feedback from players on what we've presented recently. And so we're still open to feedback, and we're still looking at how it's going to work. When you go to buy something, it'll say like, this is the gold cost, and this is how much gold you have to give to the other person. And this is the favor cost, and the favor cost goes to the bazaar. It's sort of like it's like the tax on it.
Okay, so this must be a designed philosophy around what we don't want is for people just to become merchant warriors, where all they do is become the strongest person and the richest person in the game by just saving and manipulating trade the whole time. Instead, it's like, it's a game. You're supposed to play the game. Kill stuff, right?
Yeah, that's a lot of it for sure. It's also the primary balancing metric we have between the two factions. So because both factions require favor to interact with them, so like if you want to go buy a prophecy, it costs favor in COF. And so what we can do, because both factions have the same cost to interact with the faction itself, and you gain it at the same rate for each faction, we can really easily balance them against each other by just changing the favor costs of each one of them. So we can say like, oh, we get to the end of cycle 1 or cycle 2 starting, and we're like, oh, 98% of people were one of the factions. Like, maybe we should make that more expensive and the other one cheaper a little bit. Just like, they could balance it out that way a little bit, So having that favor cost as a consistent resource that's required between the two, it lets us balance them against each other.
The topic of itemization was an easy steamroll right into farming versus trading items for rare drops. How are you going to balance that in some of the more sticky type of questions that we really needed developer clarity when it comes to their philosophy on these things?
Yeah, that's a huge topic. It's very tricky. You're right. It's very tricky to balance those against each other for sure. We want players to feel like they can, influence their drops, especially as Merchants Guild still, be able to say like, they can feel like they're working towards a goal, and they can say, I'm going to do this content until I get this thing I'm looking for. We really like that. And we really want Circle of Fortune more is just enhancing those features that are there already. We're just bringing a little bit more oomph to that targetness of it. New word. So we want Merchants Guild to be able to just be better at target farming, really, because we still do want players to be able to target farm to an extent, as we already have in the game right now. We're not looking to really drop that ability off a cliff or something like that for Merchants Guild players. We still want them to be able to reasonably, influence what they're getting and look for specific things and be able to do that a little bit better than just everything's random.
Now I have a question related to resonances. Let's say you have one person who is playing way more than another person, and resonances in the game are a way to allow you, if you get a drop, to give it to another friend who maybe was not online. That way you don't necessarily have to be in the same party all the time to still have sort of a co-op experience. So my question to this was, what if one person's playing way more than the other person. The person might feel left behind, and their items that they acquire in resonance to give to the other player might not be as useful to the other player. How do you manage to balance that? And he had an honest answer.
Yeah, if there's a big imbalance in the playtime, it is going to be a bit of a one-way street. It's an unfortunate side effect of the system, but it's kind of not something that we have a big intent to change much on. I think a lot of it comes down to is just if you're playing a lot more, you're just gonna have so many better things.
Hard to balance around, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. The main goal of that system is it's to stop the feels bad moment of, oh, we've been playing together a bunch, and the moment we stop playing together and I go play on my own, I find that perfect thing for you. Or even just like, oh, I went and did one echo on my own and the perfect thing happened to drop, even though we're still online together. It's just to fill those like little gaps.
There was a very obvious quality of life question people have been asking, and we tried to get clarification on that in terms of respecking, changing masteries, an armory type of system. Ghazi asked this question, and here was the answer.
Right now, for those of you unaware, when you choose character, you can choose a different type of masteries, but after you've locked in your mastery on that character, you are currently unable to change that. So is this something that you are going to be able to respec? Yes or no, and why?
Right now, for one, so all I'm going to talk about for this answer is for 1.0. Right now, it's no. You will not be able to respec your mastery. That is locked in. And there's 2 points that 2 angles that people come at wanting to change this. It's that like, what if I mess up my character? That sort of fear. And we really try really hard to make sure that every mastery can have fun and tackle endgame and really get stuff done and do what you need to do. And maybe the people that want to push really, really hard into the super endgame where only the absolute top tier builds will even be possible to compete with, they're not going to have any problem making a second character. That process is short enough, especially if you're playing online and you have friends that can help you get through that even faster. Like it's a short enough time period that we're not really concerned about those players that much for it. We do know that people really like having that freedom to be able to switch things up, but we also really want to convey that sense of ownership and connection to your character a little bit. That feeling that like, oh, this is my fire sork, and you actually have that connection to this is my fire sork, and it's not just this is my mage that I switch around between all the different masteries. We want to have more permanent decisions if we can, but they're really tricky to work in and not feel terrible. We kind of want to avoid a meta, like a leveling and endgame meta where it's like, oh, I level Sork and then I switch to Spellblade for early endgame, then I switch to Ringmaster for late endgame, and that whole like that character's identity is not based in, oh, it's a Ringmaster. It's just a mage. And it loses a lot of that flavor for us.
I had a couple questions related to hardcore. Is it possible to have a game balanced around hardcore and have that actually make the game fundamentally better? Or is hardcore sort of a barrier that is frustrating for the devs to develop around? How do you balance both of these things within the same game without affecting the core gameplay? And this was his answer to that question.
It is something that we keep in mind very frequently when we're designing enemies, players' abilities, items, all sorts of things. There's tons of little things that we do take hardcore into account for when we're designing them, for sure. There's some passives where we're like chance-based cheat death passives where we're like, well, no one in hardcore is going to take that. It's not reliable, so there's no point in having it type thing. And there's like some defense. It's a lot of times it's defensive mechanics and passives that we're talking about now. We're like, this is not for hardcore players because we know they're not going to take it. We try and still design ways for them to build their character without needing to take those. Sometimes it's in the way we design boss fights. We try to make them learnable. And this is something that goes for not just hardcore as well, because we want players that sometimes getting through challenges and getting to a pivotal moment where if you die, you have to start all over again. We still want to be able to teach them how to interact with those mechanics. There was one recently that we were talking about where like there's a mechanic you have to dodge basically, and if you fail to dodge it too many times, it's eventually going to kill you. But the first few, it's just teaching you that you got to dodge this type thing, and that's that slow ramp up in teaching you how to play the boss fights. And so yeah, we do definitely look at hardcore when we're designing mechanics in the game. And I kind of went all over the place there.
Just to follow up on this, do you find that hardcore as a concept from a development side either strives you to improve the game, or does it feel more of like a limiting aspect of the game where, okay, well, we're trying to build a game, but we got to make sure that it's viable for hardcore too? Do you find this to be a difficult challenge to overcome, or do you find it something that at the end of the day tends to improve your game?
I think it improves the game overall. I think it's both. I think it is a challenge, and it is difficult sometimes to make work, but I think it makes the game better in the long run, which is what you want, right? Like, just because it's easy doesn't make it good.
This road into death punishment is an obvious topic. So how does softcore actually have punishments related to death? This was a question by Gossi, and he answered it.
We're not a big fan of the negative progression that comes with losing experience when you do die. Personally, when I'm playing, I really like the tension that having stronger death penalties provide, which is why I've gravitated to hardcore in some games in the past. But it really does, I think, need to be an opt-in type of thing to have on the line. You're sort of like going out into the world, and you're like, I'm betting I'm not going to die because I'm good enough, and I'm fine with the outcomes, and I know there's could be negative consequences here, but like I'm ready to take on that challenge. And I think having that opt-in nature of that penalty is really good. I don't think we're really interested in having that type of put your money on the table type situation with experience, because it splits things again. Maybe if there was some sort of, I don't know, benefit out of it, but it's one of those things that we're more interested in having more of a loss of opportunity in the penalties. So you're not making negative progression, you're just not making positive progression. And this happens in dungeons too. Like you do lose your dungeon key. So you are like you're paying an entry fee, and then if you fail, you lose that entry fee.
Because of the death conversation we had, particularly hardcore, I wanted some clarification on their stance of one-shot mechanics and how they end up developing the game around one-shot mechanics. He had a really interesting answer.
I think that they are good in small doses when you can be taught about them effectively beforehand and are easily able to see them coming and like have an opportunity to react to them. So one-shot mechanics are, it's a skill test is really what it is. It's your character is not strong enough to handle this, so you as a player have to do something to stop your character from dying. So it's a player skill test instead of a character gear check, which is like an enrage mechanic on a boss is a character gear check where like you gotta kill it fast enough. And like, doesn't matter how good a player you are, if your character can't do enough damage, you're not going to get through it. So this is kind of the opposite of that. And we do have a few one-shot mechanics in boss. Like Julra is the end of our first dungeon, and she will kill you if you stand in her like big giant attack. You're done. Part of the reason we have that in that specific dungeon is the whole dungeon leading up to that, we've given you a special ability, and we've said, and the whole dungeon, in order to get through it, you have to use this special ability multiple times. So we're like hammering into you. This is what you need for this fight. And it's kind of when we were designing dungeons and specifically this mechanic, it's kind of reminiscent of like a Zelda dungeon in a way, where you walk into the dungeon, you get the item from the dungeon, you have to use that item in the dungeon to kill the boss of the dungeon, and you're out. And it's sort of that same type of learning mechanic that we try to implement there, where you're using the thing you get there to conquer it. And it is a skill check, and it is something that we do like having these types of one-shot mechanics in the game if they're presented properly. And I think the bad one-shot mechanics that we do end up seeing in Last Epoch, which is it's a little frustrating to have, but they do show up sometimes. And this is sort of a byproduct of having any infinite scaling system. When you get too high in corruption in our endgame system, that there's no real end to it, there's no cap. You can keep scaling corruption as high as you want, and that difficulty keeps ramping up over and over and over. And then abilities that were once just strong abilities become one-shot abilities because you've cranked up the damage and difficulty so high. And because those were not designed as one-shot mechanics in the first place, they don't have a proper anticipation for it, and it just becomes, well, that's the wall your character hit. So these one-shot mechanics can show up in multiple places, and the ones that we've designed them to show up in, we do try and tutorialize them as best we can beforehand. And the ones that they kind of organically show up in, I don't know how to fix that yet.
We started talking about the seasons, or as they call it in Last Epoch, the cycle, and we had some multiple questions related to the cycle. Where are the different breakpoints or benchmarks within the cycle? How are they able to keep mindful of the audience that maybe wants to play the core part of the game that aren't interested in creating new characters and being part of the cycle, etc.? Here's some of their answers related to cycle-based questions.
Yeah, so I mean, like if you really want to measure how much content you're going to be getting out of a cycle, I think it's going to depend how deep you want to dive into it. And we do really want players to have fun stuff to do and explore for the entire time between cycles, if they want, and be able to get a bulk of the experience out from the first couple months of it, depending on how hard you're playing. But we do want players to feel like there's different benchmarks. Breakpoints might be a better word for it, where you can be like, okay, I'm really going to invest in like completing this angle, the primary feature of the cycle or something like that. I'm going to dig in real deep, and maybe there's like some extra stuff you can go for if you want, but like, oh, I don't have an extra 10 hours to go for that, so I'll pass on that for this cycle or something like that. Maybe just can't quite finish it in time. And we also have to be mindful that a huge percentage of our audience is also interested in playing, other games that are offering similar cyclical content, PoE and D4 and E3 and D2R and Torchlight and Grim Dawn. Like there's a ton of other games out there that are pulling attention at the same sort of like new content getting dropped really frequently. So we kind of have to be aware that not everyone's going to stick around for the whole cycle every single time, and give them an opportunity to have fun and really engage with the content, but still have enough to sink their teeth into if they don't want to go to those other games as well. And it's a very difficult balancing act to walk. And our very first cycle is really focused on getting our core game out and just having those core features solid and fun and all that sort of stuff. And we're going to look at getting into these more I guess like PoE League type style mechanics a little bit in the future here.
Are we talking 3 months, 4 months, half a year cycles, or what are we looking at on the terms of length there?
Yeah, I can't give you like a specific number here, but I can say it'll feel similar to what you're expecting from other games as well.
Because of balance mechanics being something that we were talking about, I had a question related to the balance of solo versus group play. Can we expect group play to just be statistically better than being a solo player? And how is that going to affect what you feel like you should be doing when it comes to efficiency? And here was his breakdown on that answer.
The one-liner we try and strive for, anyways, is a well-oiled machine group that is organized and planned ahead will be better than an individual player playing on their own, who will be better than a haphazard group that's just thrown together and said, let's go have fun. We want those margins to be pretty small. We don't want them to be a big difference. We want it to be like, hey, like because you did a good job at working together, you're rewarded a little bit. And we do have party size difficulty scaling as just like a straight, like this is how much harder it is. And those numbers can be adjusted very easily. And sometimes small adjustments can have a big meta effect. You don't need to make a huge change to have the conversation shift.
We also had a question related to future events, races, things that might come to the game of this nature, maybe even community hosted.
I can't speak specifically to every single thing we're going to do in the future, because I think a lot of that's going to come down to experimentation. And like we'll probably try to run events where it's like, hey, this is specifically a party event, or this is an open event, or specifically a solo event. We'll experiment with different types, because a lot of that's going to come back to community feedback of what feels good, what players enjoy. I know we already separate ladder progression based on party size in order to try and compensate for that a little bit. So I think there'll likely just be different categories initially for different party sizes. It's probably what we'll try and do.
And one of the more important questions in ARPGs is visual clarity. This is something we also asked about last Epoch, and here's how they are addressing visual clarity.
It's a great point, because you start getting into things, we don't have any skill MTX yet, but you start getting things where it's like, oh, you can buy skill MTX and suddenly your fireball is got like a rainbow fireball, and it's so much more, or something like that. Like there's a lot of room for that visual clarity to very easily get out of hand. Yeah. And it is something we're careful of, much to the sometimes VFX designers' dismay. But yeah, it's one of those things where we do pay very close attention to it. I can very well see there come a time where we have to make a systematic change in order to like add some new feature to the game in order to be able to have a big boost to visual clarity. I'm being kind of vague about this because we don't have anything designed or set up yet to do this, but there may come a time where we need to focus on that, and we're definitely prepared to make that investment in improving visual clarity if it comes to it.
One of the questions I had was about melee versus ranged. Ranged has an innate advantage because they can hit from far away, whereas in some games melee gets overbuffed because of this, and in some games they get completely ignored and are not strong as ranged characters. So my question was, how is Last Epoch addressing the melee versus ranged debate and balance issue?
We usually try to give melee classes more defensive options, and sometimes those are just passives or skills that reflect that ability. An example of that being give abilities like Rebuke to Sentinel, which is generally mostly a melee class, has ranged options, but is primarily melee, and it's an ability that you can just tank almost everything in the game with it. And we try and give those more defensive options to classes that are generally in melee situations. The other half of this is, or we'll give them higher mobility options. So Rogue is like a Blade Dancer anyways, is primarily a melee class. And we try and give them lots of mobility options so that they are able to reposition themselves in combat really efficiently. We also do look at boss design as well, because that's where it really stands out, I think, for the most part, is boss design, or boss encounters, sorry. We have the ability in our AI system to say, okay, like here's a list of abilities that the boss can do, and this ability they can't target within a certain range. So it's like they'll only use this ability if someone's at range, or they'll only use this ability if someone's at melee. And so we can actually change which abilities they're using based on how far you are from the boss. And so sometimes we'll maybe give the same ability, but it goes off a little faster if you're at range. So you'll actually have to dodge a little bit more actively if you're farther away or something like that. Just to sort of offset that a little bit.
Because we're sort of talking about balance changes, we brought the conversation to mid-cycle balance changes, meaning patches in the middle of the season. How is Last Epoch planning to address things like overpowered builds? Should we expect changes during the live of the season? And here was his honest answer on that.
Yes, short answer, yes. You can expect mid-cycle balance changes. Balance changes in general. This whole thing is a bit of a hornet's nest. If you make a mistake, it can be disastrous, which is something that we are. So we do take care when we are making balance changes, especially mid-season stuff. It hasn't been a big deal for us in the past because we're not in this huge audience yet, and there's not this huge level of competitiveness yet. But we do know that it's coming, and we do know that we need to be tactful with how we handle this. I guess the general philosophy of these sorts of things is if there's a build that is really running away with the game, like really just it's this or nothing, have fun, type thing, then we'll probably be pretty inclined to step in and do something. Probably just be to give other builds a fighting chance. If there is a build that is a top tier build, we want to be really careful to make sure it stays a top tier build, especially mid-cycle. Because one of the worst things I think we can do is have a bunch of people make this character, have it be crushing, and then us be like, all right, patch day, here we go. You can't do anything anymore. Sucks to be you. Like that would just feel terrible. The obvious answer is, okay, we'll just don't nerf it and just buff other things to match it. Great. Now we've got other things that are at the same level. Awesome. They've been buffed. Wonderful. And then we get to the end of the cycle and we go, okay, but now we've got a bunch of builds that are just way too powerful, and we have to nerf them all back. And suddenly it becomes this cycle of in mid-cycle we buff everything, and in between cycles we nerf everything, and that doesn't feel good either. So we have to kind of take an approach, like a hybrid approach of both things at every sort of juncture.
Speaking of cycles, we brought up a point about legacy cycles. Are we expecting some of the content that's in the new cycles to go to the core gameplay at the same time? How is that going to be addressed?
All the characters that exist currently on live, if you're playing online right now, effectively, those are all legacy characters already. When you boot up at 1.0, there's going to be a pop-up that says, hey, your character's been moved to legacy. We do see a ton of people who are, especially when they find out that like item factions are coming to legacy characters with 1.0, that are quite happy about that. And there's this balancing act of bringing new content to legacy immediately at the same time as cycles, and then like, is there enough interest in playing a cycle if there's no new content for it? And so that's a big give and take there for sure. And then for us as well, it's monitoring or maintaining is a better word, and developing for two different gameplay environments is something that we have to be conscious of, right? Like, so once we start having new content that does eventually long term that does eventually start coming to cycle only, maybe that's a possibility. We don't know exactly how that's going to shake out yet. It's going to come down to a lot of player feedback. It's going to come down to just seeing how people are engaging with our content. We are very mindful that a lot of people don't like cycle content, and we are very mindful that a lot of people do like cycle content. And balancing those two desires is very difficult, but I don't think it's impossible to have a fun environment for both.
We also continued the conversation around trade and how exactly trade is going to influence the economy of the game. He brought up several good points, which I thought were pretty interesting around the trade part of the system.
We want the Merchants Guild Bazaar to be an effective tool for players to improve their gear that they're finding, that can fill in the gaps in the gear that they're missing, where they're playing the game and they're like, oh, I really need to find this piece of gear. I can go to the bazaar and I can get it. And we really want that to be an accessible option for everyone that's playing in the Merchants Guild. And we want that to be an effective tool for everyone that's playing, and to be able to gain access to that trade system, even if they're not playing the market really. And so that's the approach we're taking from it, is that we want this to be an accessible market for everyone. The unfortunate side effect of that approach for players that really want to play the market as a mechanic, where they're buying and flipping items and things like that, is that we kind of have to shut that down a little bit. And we actually have to shut that down a lot, because unfortunately you can't resell an item at all. You buy that item, you craft it, you do whatever you want to it. It's not going back up on the bazaar. You're using it or you're throwing it away. And this is one of the most complex systems we've ever introduced into the game, possibly the most complex system we've ever introduced in the game. And we are not afraid to change it. If something's not working, we will adjust it, especially once people have their hands on it. That's the most valuable, because there's a lot of like theoretical feedback that we're getting, which is very valuable. But once people actually have a chance to experience it and play with it and tell us how they feel, like, when I did X, I felt Y. And that's the type of feedback that's really, really, really important to us. But right now, unfortunately, for people that want to play the market as a game mode, that's not going to be available right now.
Guild systems got brought up. Is guilds going to be a fundamental core part of the game?
Pretty much all ARPGs that I can think of, or most of them, have a guild function. Yet there is very little impact or benefit or even purpose behind the guild functions other than, hey, you now have access to a little, tag in your name and another chat channel to chat with your friends in. What's the plans with guilds moving forward for Last Epoch?
Yeah, so you literally said, as soon as you start talking about guilds, I'm like, well, that's exactly what I'm going to say. And you said exactly what I was going to say about how the conclusion we came to of what a guild system would look like in Last Epoch. It would be a tag by your name and a private chat channel. And while there's not there's value in that, and we do know that players want to have that, and there's good things to have there. It's not enough value to take time away from other development processes right now for us to add something like that. We do really like the idea of having a guild system. And we think that those buildings of communities inside of games is really valuable. So we don't want to discount that at all. And I would be surprised if we never introduce a guild system to Last Epoch. We'd really like to see some sort of mechanic to go with it, some extra thing to do, some reason to have guilds there, and at the same time not being mandatory to join that guild to play in games like that. Because we know we don't want people to feel left out of playing the game if they don't join a guild, but we do want people to feel like there's some sort of activity to do, or maybe not activity is a bad word, but just reason to compete with other guilds, or maybe a guild ladder or something. I don't know how that would look exactly, but just something a little bit more than a tag in a chat channel. Yeah.
We also talked about WASD movement. This is a hot topic now in ARPGs, and I'll just save you the cut back to the interview on this one. Doesn't look like WASD is currently being planned to be implemented, but it is a soon.tm. Maybe in the future they'll readdress this. One of the things that I was curious about was, are they going to slowly be improving the graphics over time? Are they going to have small iterations of improvements every single time we see a patch, etc., when it comes to the visual graphics of the game? And he had some answers to that.
1.0 has some great visual updates to it every time. So I do our Friday dev stream, and every time I do that, I play on the live version of the game, and I boot it up, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is what it looks like. Okay, fine. So I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty excited about what's going to be there for 1.0 for everyone. It's just so many little things. Yeah, we're always trying to make the game look prettier, look crisper, look more exciting, more interesting, all these sorts of things. And that will not stop. That's an ongoing process that we are going to continue doing.
Then we sort of were wrapping up the conversation at this point, and I wanted to hit them with more of a harder hitting question at the end, which is, where exactly is the line on their stance when it comes to third-party applications? As this is always a big talking point in the ARPG category. So here was my question on that with his answer. I know that third-party tools are something that is always a topic of debate, regardless what game we're talking about. So when it comes to your team, where do you draw the line? Because almost everyone's going to say, if you have a website maybe that tracks the price of stuff, on average, that's fine. And then there's going to be some where it's all the way to overlays in the game to make the game easier and help you dodge skill shots, for instance. So where is the line for you guys in particular with Last Epoch?
So I think I'll start with our goals with third-party tools, is that we don't want any player to feel the need to go use a third-party tool. If someone shows up and says, hey, I'm a new player, and they jump into our Reddit and they're like, hey, I'm a new player, what should I do? We want the response from the community to just be like, just start playing, have fun. That's where we want people to start with, is just go have fun. Having said that, there's already third-party tools that people have made that are unbelievably useful and great, and we love having them available to the community. So we're really appreciative to the people that have made those tools. And so there's sort of this weird balance, and it's like, how far is too far with that? I don't want to draw a hard line in the sand. I'd say the general philosophy on it is that if it's interacting with active gameplay, we're probably not huge on that. Like when you bring up things like overlays that are like telling you when to dodge and things like that, that's probably a little bit too far for us.
Now, I didn't put all of the questions in this video. I actually left out a good amount of them on purpose. If you want to see Ghazi TV's full VOD rip of this podcast, I will have a link down below to his channel, and you can see all of the questions, all of the interaction in its entirety. This video is just for brevity of some of the more important talking points. So shout out to my co-host Ghazi, and shout out to Mike from Last Epoch, as well as 11th Hour Games. Thank you to all of you guys for this podcast. It was a good amount of fun, and thank you to the viewer for watching the video. See you on the next one.